Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today for a discussion on economic education in America. My name is Rebecca Patterson, and I'm very honored to be the chair of the board for the Council on Economic Education. We're headquartered here in New York City, and I am joined today by two absolutely amazing people to have this conversation with, both doctors. So I will not short shrift that title, Dr. Jennifer Davidson and Dr. Andrew Hill. Jennifer is calling in today from Nebraska. She's the president of the Nebraska Council on Economic Education and an associate professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And she and Andrew have spent most of their professional lives really dedicated to economic education and making sure more young people in our country start their adult lives understanding the basics of economics so they can make good decisions for themselves, their families, their communities. Andrew is calling in today from Philadelphia. So we have the country decently represented, I would say. And Andrew is Assistant Vice President of Economic Education at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, where he heads the bank's economic and personal finance education program. So our goal today is to give you a window into the state of economic and personal finance education for students in the United States. We want to cover that, but we also want to show you why this type of education is so important. Thirdly, we want to talk about how we and others are trying to fulfill this mission to prepare young people today to make good economic decisions for themselves and to have that critical building block for their lives. We want to talk a little bit about how we teach teachers and why reaching out to teachers in addition to students directly is so important. And finally, we want to share with you what's needed for us to make more progress. We're hoping to cover all of this in about 45 minutes and have time at the end of our session today for questions from you. So please, as we go along, if you think of something, note it down and we'll come back to it at the end. I think we can all agree that ensuring that students have a foundational understanding of economics is a critical building block for them to have healthy financial lives. And it doesn't stop just at those individuals who are reached, but also their families, their communities. And when we think about that in aggregate, that's how we get a stronger economy and a more stable financial system. So with that in mind, Andrew, let me kick it off with you. The Federal Reserve, as I think most of us on the call today know, has a dual mandate, trying to achieve maximum employment and stable prices. How does economics education fit in there? What is your role when you think about that in terms of the dual mandate? So I'll let you kick us off today.
Sounds good. I should first say that all my comments today are my own and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or those of the Federal Reserve System. But my Federal Reserve colleagues and I, we have a very long-standing interest in economic education at the Fed. It really started in the 1970s. And a lot of that has been around making sure that people understand what it is that the Federal Reserve does that affects all of our lives every day. As you mentioned, clearly that's an important part of that is monetary policy and what we do in order to achieve the monetary policy goals. But then also in terms of banking supervision and regulation, and then also in terms of the oversight of the payment system in the United States. And really, it's important, I think, for people in general, but certainly young people to understand how it is that our economy works, how the Fed helps people to make sure that they're working in this economy well. And the more they understand about how economics works, we think that that's going to lead to them making better decisions in their own lives that then make the economy as a whole work better for everyone. So that's really the goal, is to enhance people's understanding of what we're doing and why it matters.
When I first introduce people to what I do at the Council for Economic Education, or CEE, sometimes I get sort of a quizzical reaction. I think some people have these flashbacks to freshman year in college where they have to memorize a lot of economic equations or stare at endless demand and supply curves. And I think the three of us appreciate that what we're talking about today is so much different than that, so much more than that. Jennifer, when you're explaining economics education to people, what do you say? How do you bring this to life for people?
So I get exactly what you're saying, Rebecca. What do you think I get when I tell people I'm an economics professor? what? So let me take a step back and explain, okay, what is economics and why is it important? And then let's talk about what is economic education and how do you teach it? This is what economic education is. How do you teach it in such a way that students might actually want to learn more? That's what we're actually about. So economics at its core, it's all about decision making. It's about the fact that scarcity exists, we can't have everything we want, and we have to make choices. So people often think it's all about money, right? We hear that all the time too. And in bad econ classes, it might be delivered that way, or in a substituted personal finance class, it's probably a lot of talk about money. But economics is so much more than that. So it's people, choices, incentives, trade-offs, consequences that lie in the future. It explains everything from why you chose what you chose to eat for breakfast, to how you manage your time, to how many employees to how many employees to hire, to what's happening in the national economy. So interest rates, prices, all of that, that's economics. It affects everyone every day, and it's part and parcel training to critical thinking. So it really is necessary for everybody to have a really good basic understanding. Our democracy requires its citizenry to have a solid understanding. The economy is one of the biggest issues in most elections, certainly the most recent one, but there's so much misinformation out there and misunderstanding. So as a country, and certainly in Econ Ed, this is what we're trying to address. We're trying to fill in these gaps.
Yeah, I can't even imagine trying to make sense of all the policy proposals today and what it could mean for businesses, for families in the next year, 4 years of this administration without having that economic grounding. It's hard enough with the economic grounding. I can't imagine not having that. How do you make choices about whether to save? Is a 5% 10-year treasury yield a great deal or a bad deal? Is that where I should put my money? How do I decide how much I need to save and what vehicle I should be saving it in? I mean, all these things, having that economic education makes those decisions and that understanding feasible, frankly. Andrew, anything you want to add there?
One of the things we often describe, or we use to describe, a term we use to describe what Jennifer was just talking about, is the economic or economics way of thinking. And so it's one of the things we're trying to get younger people to understand is how we can think through all kinds of different problems, whether they be societal or personal, using this toolkit of comparing costs and benefits, thinking about concepts of opportunity cost. And then the reason why this is so much different than what people perhaps experienced in their undergraduate experience is all the modes we use. So, we use all the different types of exciting teaching methods that are available to K-12 teachers to convey this information in, really exciting ways. It's not usually the lecture kind of thing that people maybe experienced in college.
Thank you for that. I want to turn a little bit to kind of where we are today as a country. So when we're out there teaching economics, who are we teaching it to? How many students are actually getting the benefit of this education? And maybe I'll kick off and then have the two of you join in. The Council for Economic Education, one of the different things it does is advocate with great partners all over the country, and including corporate partners like Visa. So we'll work with state legislatures and governors to try to get requirements passed. And I'm happy to say that over the last few years, we've had tremendous progress. Today we have, and hopefully I have the latest numbers correct, 28 states that require at least one course in economics to graduate, and 35 states that require at least one course in personal finance to graduate. And some states have both. So that's great progress. I mean, literally lots and lots of states just in the last few years. I think the pandemic and the volatility in the economy over that period probably helped spur some states to move ahead. But we can also see how much more work we have to do. I mean, there are so many students out there, millions of students who are not getting this education yet. I'd love to get your perspective on this. How do we get that through the states? Why does it take so long? Maybe Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, research shows that more economics is learned when more economics is taught. So there's that. And I can surely tell you in Nebraska, so Nebraska is one of the states that recently passed a personal finance mandate, right? So now all students are going to get a course in personal finance. We are not a state that has an economics course requirement as of yet. We do have state standards. Education is really done at the state level, so it really is going to differ state by state, but education is something that does take some time. State standards are reevaluated every 5 to 10 years in your state. In Nebraska, it's every 7 years where we go over the state standards with a fine-tooth comb, and I get to participate in that and talk about what's required to be taught, what should be taught, how should it be taught, where should it be taught, who gets to teach it, all of these things. So Nebraska, we have state standards. They are required to be taught, but they can be taught infused in other courses. And that's a whole other issue that we can talk about versus a standalone economics course. Can also tell you that students do better. There are better outcomes in terms of learning economics when it's a standalone course. Infusion is not a substitute for that. It's a good, if you know, there's limited time in the school day, we understand that. So if that's the option, it's a good option, but we would prefer a standalone course and more time dedicated to this important subject.
And it does remind me that, one of the challenges to getting more of these requirements through to the states is simply the way our democracy is set up. We have state legislatures and governors that have regular elections, and every time there's a new election, you might have a new set of people coming in, and you have to explain to them what you do, why this matters, what other states are doing it. Then it has to become a priority for them to vote on, and it has to get passed. And even when it gets passed, it doesn't always mean they attach funding to it. And if there's no funding, then how do you teach the teachers? You have no money to do that with. And that is part of where we all come in to provide some of that teaching to the teachers, whether or not the state has provided funding for it. But there's a lot of hurdles to get across that finish line. And I do want to come back in a minute, Jennifer, to why it's so important, the impact. Both of you actually, Jennifer, you and I in our situations, we're working to try to find donors, corporate donors, individual donors to support what we do, whether that's building curriculum, reviewing standards, reaching out to students directly, teaching teachers. And to get those donations, one of the key things we need to show is metrics. We need to show research that proves what we do has a real impact. And so maybe I can ask both of you just to share some of the research you've seen that gives you confidence that what we're doing matters.
Sure. Go ahead, Andrew.
Do you want to go first, or you want me? I'll go first. So, we recently did a study, actually, my colleagues in Atlanta, the Atlanta Reserve Bank, the St. Louis Reserve Bank, and ourselves. We did a project where we trained a set of teachers to teach a group of lessons to students in elementary, middle, and high school. And then we measured using student test scores. We tested the students before they received those lessons and after. It was a statistically significant gain in the students' knowledge from pre-test to post-test, which is excellent. It was a relatively small project. It was about 10 to 12 lessons, so it wasn't a full course like Jennifer's talking about. But the other thing we did is we interviewed the teachers afterwards, and we asked them, and this is the first study like this that's really been done in our field. We asked the teachers about the impact of those economics lessons on the students. And the students reported a number of things. One of the things I should mention is that these students were overwhelmingly in schools that were majority minority, but also tended to be low income as well. And many of these students were not engaged in school. And one of the things that came back was that the students told the teachers they really wanted to make sure that they were there in class to participate in these lessons. So really the active learning type of lessons that we developed and that we trained the teachers with made a difference. The other thing that the teachers told us is that the students reported that they felt much more informed about what was going on in the world, about what they were seeing on the news as a result of having learned economics. And that's really back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, is one of our goals is to make students more aware about the world around them and how it works and how our economy can be successful for them. So we really thought this was a very successful project. It was small, but we got the kinds of results that we really were hoping for, which is that students learned economics, that it made a difference in terms of their knowledge, and that it's something that they thought that was valuable to them.
That's great.
Jennifer,
that's a great example. Yeah, Jennifer, do you have other research that you tend to point to?
Yeah, sure. There's just general research out there. There's studies that show students who take economics in high school perform better in college. So that's an important piece. There's a couple of studies showing taking more economics is significantly related to higher levels of earning, home equity, and savings, and that more economics coursework is also associated with having fewer credit cards, more often to be paid off in full each month. So just we're seeing good outcomes associated with taking economics exposure to these economic concepts. So in general, improves critical thinking. It's a really good outcome for economic education. We really teach this framework for better decision making, and that's what Andrew was talking about at the beginning of the hour. It makes us less likely to be taken advantage of by fraud because we have this analytical tool to think through things, and fraud is rampant, right? So we want students and teachers to be aware and not make bad decisions. I like to describe it as this superpower to understanding the world around you. That's really the word I use.
That's great. That's great. And I'll add one other little piece of research that I think is really helpful, especially when we read about student debt today and just the crushing amount of student debt that really drags behind people for decades after they finish college. We have seen research that shows that students who took a course in economics, personal finance, were able to get lower cost student debt. They were able to make better choices for any borrowing they needed to do to attend college. Obviously, less debt at a young age is going to make it easier for you to move out of that debt later on. So lots and lots of great examples. And I like the more soft skills on critical thinking as well. I think that's incredibly important. I want to talk a little bit about how we do what we do. And I say we, like the royal we, because I'm not out there teaching teachers, you guys are. I find it so interesting. And I had a light bulb moment when this concept first made itself clear to me, the multiplier effect of economic education. You know, we think about the multiplier effect of economic policy. You know, if the government puts money into infrastructure or AI, how that can benefit the economy at a much greater scale than what we paid into it. But teaching economics is the same way. So, Andrew, maybe I'll start with you this time. Let's talk a little bit about the multiplier effect. And I definitely want to make sure in here we give a shout out to some of our best multipliers out there. I think we have Dr. Heath from Cincinnati, right? We need to be giving her a shout
Yes.
out.
So, one of the things that our network, and I'll just explain the network, is really broadly all the folks that are really members of the National Association of Economic Educators. It involves a number of different organizations, including CEE, but the Federal Reserve Banks. It involves the state councils and centers for economic education. It involves other organizations like the Foundation for Teaching Economics and the Foundation for Economic Education and others that are involved in this space. Most of us, all of us working in this network, are looking at the power of teachers to be a force multiplier, as you say, to be the people who then are, first of all, incredibly skilled at teaching students in the classroom. They're with students every day. So what we work to do is to give them the resources, curriculum resources and training in order to make them better at being able to explain economics to their students. And, one of the things that's true is, just like many people perhaps that are on this webinar tonight, is that they may not have had necessarily the best economics experience in college. Many of the teachers that we work with are teachers who maybe didn't have economics in college, and we prepare them, we give them high quality lessons that they then take to their students. So if you work with a teacher and you spend an hour or a day training a teacher, or sometimes we have multi-day courses, those teachers are then, for the rest of their career, they might have 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the case may be, left in their career. They're going to share those lessons and those experiences with their own students for many years to come. So it means that you get a much better return on investment when you work with the teacher, and then that teacher is excited about economics and then can prepare many students going forward. So we use them then as our multiplier. And as you pointed out, we've had at the National Association of Economic Educators, which I'm the president of this year, and Jennifer is the president-elect, we have a number of awards, and one of our awards is the Multiplier Award. That's how important it is to our network, to CE, to the Reserve Banks, to the state councils and centers, that we honor those people who have been really great multipliers. As you mentioned, Julie Heath in Cincinnati has been a person who has done a tremendous amount over many decades to train teachers, to equip teachers who then have taught thousands of students economics. Jennifer, I'll give you a chance there on that.
Thanks. Yes, we all work off the multiplier model, right? It makes sense just from an allocation perspective to put funding, to put resources into teachers that are going to then see students year after year for the remainder of their career. Teachers are on the front lines of education. They're doing the work of educating the next generation. And there's some difficulties in teacher certification. Again, there's this crowded curriculum and they only get to learn so many things. Sadly, econ isn't always that at the forefront of what they're having to take for their teacher certification. So there's some research on this too. I'll just share a little bit. 6 in 10 teachers earned no course credits in economics in their undergraduate career. Of teachers certified to teach social studies, so these are the ones most likely to teach economics, 40% did not take an undergraduate course in economics. So social studies certification, it's crowded, right? They have to teach history, world history, civics, geography, psychology, sociology. So imagine trying to get all of that coursework into one teacher to then go in the classroom. This is where the importance of this network comes in to fill in the gaps for these teachers and make economics exciting for not only them, but for their teachers after them that they're going to teach in the classroom. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't want to get too wonky on this, but I do think both of you, when we were talking about this call in recent days, you both made the point about pre versus in. So when do you do this teaching? And the fact that in your opinions, from your experience, and you have a lot of it, it makes a big difference. Can either of you just address that briefly? Andrew, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, sure. We would love, so one thing I should mention is, the majority of teachers that are social studies teachers, the majority of them come to being a social studies teacher because they love history. And so that often is their primary interest. In the pre-service, some states, some universities and colleges have had a pre-service class for economics educators, but the majority of them don't get that. So pre-service, remember, is what they're doing in their undergraduate degree in order to prepare to become a certified teacher. In-service is the training that happens once they're actually in the job. And while we do work and we want more pre-service training in economics, our bread and butter, if you will, is really in the in-service space where we're working with teachers who are in the classroom already. So, one of the classic stories, and it's happened, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of times over the year, is that the youngest, newest social studies teacher is the person that winds up being assigned to teach economics, and they have nothing but a textbook put down in front of them. And so that's where all the folks in the network really step in with offering great training programs and curriculum materials that they can then make use of. And usually once we have a teacher that finds all of us in the network and gets help from us, they come back over and over again. We have a lot of repeat traffic, which is a great testament, I think, to the work that goes on in the network. But it also is really, the research shows that teachers need to have multiple training programs over time in order to become effective in economics. So we're grateful always to see our repeat visitors in our training programs.
Yep. I want a little plug for Nebraska too. So in Nebraska, until recently, teachers in the pre-service space were required to take 6 credit hours. So that's equivalent of 2 courses in economics to be a social studies teacher. And just recently, our Department of Ed increased that to 9. So now they have to take 3 courses. I'm thrilled to report. I got to help and be part of that steering committee to get that passed through. So yay, Nebraska, in ensuring our teachers are highly qualified to teach economics.
That's great.
We should mention one other program that's been incredibly successful, and this is sort of for our economics teachers that have become much more devoted over time. But there's a master's degree program at the University of Delaware that's been incredibly successful, and many people in our network are people that have come through that master's program. That is a 2-year program that gives teachers a master's degree in economic education, and another great in-service or graduate program that comes after their certification to help them along in becoming, real experts in economic education.
It's actually a really good example of how the network partners with one another to provide this education for teachers. So Nebraska has a scholarship, and we send a teacher for every cohort to help them go through this wonderfully immersive experience at Delaware. It's a great program.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I've heard lots of good things about it. And I want to keep this going on the topic of collaboration because we have all worked together in different ways. The state councils, the Federal Reserve System, CE, from a national point of view, I think we're all trying really hard to make sure there's minimal duplication of effort, and really the sum of the parts here is greater. Wait, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I'll get that right eventually. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So when I think about collaboration, the example that always pops in my mind is CE's National Teacher Conference, Educator Conference, where we have hundreds of teachers from all over the country, as well as different organizations, including the Federal Reserve, that attend, and everyone sets up booths. But there's all these amazing sessions where the teachers get together and they talk about what they're doing in the classroom, and they share best practices, and they network, and they form relationships, and that collaboration carries back to wherever they're coming from. And I remember I've attended a few of these, and the last one I was at, just blown away with the discussions around artificial intelligence, AI, and how are you using it in the classroom, both in teaching, in your lesson plan, in grading, in economics, the economics of AI. I mean, there were so many different angles to it, but just working together to figure out the best path forward for themselves and their students. But I think collaborating is so critically important for us to have the impact nationally that we all want to have. I know Andrew CE has collaborated with the Philly Fed on a few things recently. Maybe you could touch on something.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, we've done a couple of different personal finance programs in collaboration, and it's been a great opportunity to bring both CE's resources as well as the Philadelphia Reserve Bank's resources. And the event's been here at the Reserve Bank, and then CE provides curriculum, and we do training. But there's been so many collaborations over the years, between the Reserve Banks and CEE. That relationship is 40 or 50 years old. The Reserve Banks have worked with CE over many, many years. You talked about the national conference. We've been, presenters for many, many years in that. And then the individual Reserve Banks, and I should mention, emphasize that I have colleagues across the country at the Reserve Banks who are all working with their local state councils in economic education, in doing teacher training programs and doing other opportunities. So that's a long-standing relationship. And then we also have relationships and collaborations that exist beyond just, what might happen in the local area. So, Jennifer and I have worked together for a long time through our National Association of Economic Educators. That's NIE. NIE has a spring conference that's been hosted every year that it's ever been offered. That spring professional development conference for our network that's been offered at a Reserve Bank. But we've worked together on all kinds of different projects. One of the areas of collaboration that we've done a lot on over the years is the national standards in economics. And that's led by CEE, but we've had colleagues from the Reserve Banks, obviously the state councils and centers that are affiliated with the Council for Economic Education have participated in that. So we have so many opportunities to come together and work together and to leverage what we all can bring to the table in order to produce a better product for everyone. Jennifer, I'll give you a chance on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of other things I think that we should mention here. CEE's Econ EdLink is this amazing repository of active econ lessons, personal finance too, but many of the econ educators across the nation are authors and writers for these lessons, and then CEE hosts them. It's a great resource, 140,000 teachers. Huge. Actually, we just had the ethics, economics, and social issues lessons published on Econ EdLink, and they're extremely popular. So that's one people should go look at. The other big things that we collaborate on are the national competitions, National Economics Challenge, the National Personal Finance Challenge. So CEE provides infrastructure for those things. These are meant to be a hook for teachers to get students excited about economics in the real world and in their classroom. Just like sports is how I like to describe these. Why should I study this? Beyond, it's really good information for you to learn. Oh, there's a competition, and students are really going to take ownership of their own education when there's a competition and something they can win. So those are really good things. Nebraska provides the software infrastructure for those across the nation. Survey of the States we mentioned earlier, that's another big project from CEE that I think we all appreciate. Keeping track of this biennial survey of what's happening across the national landscape in terms of requirements, economics and personal finance. So we really can't overstate the amount of collaboration that goes on in this network.
And I would just, going back to the national challenges, the economic and personal finance challenges, I think last year between the two challenges, we reached close to 25,000 students around the country from all different types of communities and neighborhoods and types of schools. I've been a judge at several of these competitions, and it's, again, great to see. In this case, the teachers are involved, but this is really about the students. And for a lot of these students, the economics challenge for the last several years, the final has been in New York City. Sometimes the finals are hosted at the New York Federal Reserve, which is an absolutely beautiful building. Most of the Federal Reserves are pretty gorgeous. I haven't been to all, so I have to caveat my answer. But it's just an amazing experience. They get to go see the Statue of Liberty. They take a little tour around the city. Again, for many of them, it's their first time in that city. And the finalists, the winners, actually get to be on live television on CNBC Business News. So this coming year, we're going to have the personal finance and the economics challenges finals in Atlanta, Georgia. And the Atlanta Fed, Raphael Bostic, the president of the Atlanta Fed, is a board member for CEE. And we're excited to be working with them and have an incredible experience for the students. And we're just hoping to get it out to even more states and have more students take part, because I think they learn presentation skills. They get to meet students who have similar interests to them from all over the country. And it's really a once in a lifetime experience. And a lot of them use it for their college applications as well. I know that was a complete plug, but I do think it's a really unique and pretty awesome event for these kids.
Let me give you an additional anecdote on these challenges. So this is on the personal finance one. So our state champion from Nebraska was from a little town called Ravenna. It was a team of all 4 girls that got to go to the national champions in Cleveland this past year. This was their first time on a train and on a plane, where they got to go to this national competition. So the education really does extend beyond the content. It's really important, and it really is a great, teachers are using these all across the nation. It really is a great experience for students. So if you're not participating yet, or you haven't heard of these, do check them out. I'll help you plug.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we're plugging sincerely.
Yes.
We believe in it. So we're getting tons of questions in the chat, which is why I put on my glasses, because the font is small. But I have one more question for our group, and then we're going to try to attack some of these questions and help our audience who tuned in today. So we've spent most of this conversation talking about economics. But obviously, personal finance is kind of the hot thing for a lot of states. I think some people associate it with financial markets and investing. Some people just think about, how do I get a mortgage? How do I buy a car, et cetera? How do we think about economics and personal finance together? Should they just be taught as one thing? Should they be separate? I mean, personally, the way I always answer it when I get the question is, to me, and this is just my view, economics is the foundation. And you have to have that foundational understanding, to your point, making decisions within constraints. And then you can understand the personal finance. So one gets you to the other, and maybe they could be folded together, but they are distinctly different. And I think it's useful to do one before the other. But I'd love to hear from both of you how you think about this one. Andrew, let you start this.
Okay. I agree with you absolutely about it being the foundation. I think one of the things that's really important is to think of a Venn diagram between the economics content and the personal finance content. And if you could do this looking at state standards or the national standards, which are on CE's website, and you look at the places where those two overlap, and there's so much of what we want young people and adults to understand about personal finance that requires them really to understand basic economics as well. And so to me, they're really part of the same thing. To do one without the other really leaves something important out for what of that cadre of things, that group of things that we want young people to understand before they graduate from high school. We have a program called Keys to Financial Success that we've been doing for over 20 years in partnership with the University of Delaware. This is a curriculum that makes use of an extensive amount of Council for Economic Education materials and some other materials that we've written. And we train teachers to teach their own high school personal finance course. It's 47 lessons. We extensively train the teachers. We've shown that the training matters a lot in terms of making them better at doing it. But really throughout that course, we underlie that entire course with that economic way of thinking. It's really the thinking about economics and how much we can bring these things together that makes it possible for people to be able to understand the personal finance then, and to then be successful in their personal financial lives. So we think those things are really, really important to be together. I think it's important to note that all of us, I think, have been concerned about states deciding or individual schools deciding that they're going to substitute to a personal finance course because they think that that's more relevant to students. But, it's hard to understand a lot of aspects of your personal finances if you don't understand supply and demand, or you don't understand inflation, or you don't understand how our economy in general works. So we really think they go hand in glove, and that we need to see schools doing both together.
Yeah.
Jennifer.
I really couldn't agree more. I think students need both, and they need a full semester of economics and personal finance. That personal finance is really a subset of economics, all the things that we've talked about. So economics is decision making and choices. So you're doing your budget. If I'm spending on one thing, I necessarily can't spend on another thing. That's that trade-off that's grounded in that economic way of thinking. There's also some research that talks about you can learn the personal finance from economics, but not the other way around. So it really is important for students to get both. All the headlines too. We were talking about civic engagement, the importance of understanding all of these things in our democracy and being an informed voter. You need the economics for that. So there has been this big push for personal finance. And I think it's really important that we're having this conversation to lay out the reasons why we can't forget or substitute in lieu of economics. That we need to have a strong presence of that economics is really important.
Great. Thank you both. And that was actually a question we had in the chat. So I feel like hopefully for the gentleman who asked the question, we've addressed it. And if not, stick something else in the chat and we can come back to you. So let me get to a few of the other questions and we'll get through as many as we can in our time. I do want to be respectful of people's times wherever they are calling in from. So first one, I'm just going to read these out. Do teachers collaborate with financial coaches and or counselors to assist with any gaps in programming, resources, creativity? Are you all aware of teachers working with financial coaches or counselors? I'm not, but I'm not in the weeds like you guys are on the day-to-day.
One of the areas where that has been helpful is, a lot of teachers are looking for guest speakers to come to the classroom to provide some outside perspective to students. Now, I don't think that that's, have that person come in and teach the whole course. I think it's, getting young people to understand what a financial coach or a financial planner, what their role is in their clients' lives is important. I do think there's a concern amongst a lot of teachers also about making sure that what they're sharing with their students is agnostic, that it's not promoting any specific product. And so teachers are very, aware of that. And that's one of the important roles, I think, of the network, is that we're all doing this for the education portion. We're sharing very more generic types of things. We're not talking about specific products that are offered by specific types of firms or specific firms. And that's important, I know, to teachers. They've told us that over and over again. But I certainly think that there's a role for those types of people as guest speakers in classes.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I have a fun question here. Well, I think it's fun. So I think we're getting a little bit from high school to college, but I want to ask it anyway, because you all have spent your professional lives in this space. In your opinions, if you have a student majoring in a STEM program and they can only take one econ course during college, I feel like I should ask this for my daughter. Would you prioritize micro or macro? And how much in personal finance? I mean, my daughter, I'm basically not forcing, strongly suggesting she takes macro and micro, and she grew up with me as a mother, so she knows personal finance whether she wants to or not. But why don't you guys weigh in?
Okay, I'll weigh in. So where I'm teaching at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, I actually teach a course that's an economics survey course. It is required for the business minor, and you get both. You get your fundamentals and micro and macro in one semester. So I'm going to suggest that kind of course where you get exposure to both. if your university doesn't have something like that, I always suggest macro, just because this is where all of the headlines are in the newspaper for you to understand. So it's fiscal policy, monetary policy, unemployment, inflation, GDP. It's all of those things in a macro course so that you're aware of all the articles that you're seeing and all the headlines across the internet and the news.
So you'll be happy to know, Jennifer, you've got some other votes for macro in the chat. I want
The
to,
other thing to know about the macro course, the
yes.
principal macro course, is it goes all the way up. The first portion of both of those classes is the same, and it goes all the way up to supply and demand, and then they branch off. So even if you take a macro course, you're still going to get all the way up through supply and demand, and then you go on to the macro topics. So that's another great part about that.
Okay, so you're both voting for macro if you had to pick.
I would vote for micro, but
Why?
Um, I think there's a lot in the micro course that's important to people that are interested, particularly in the business space, because you get into things like costs, you get into the structure of the firm, you get into understanding about different types of markets, perfectly competitive, what are monopolies, those kinds of things, which you wouldn't get in the macro course. Plus, I just love teaching that class. I mean, I think it probably surprises people because I'm at the Fed, but I love teaching the micro course. I think it's so much fun.
So another question we got, how much math? How technical, how mathematical should these classes be, and how much do they need to be? I think about economic concepts, and honestly, with a lot of it, I don't think there needs to be much math at all. I think, again, it's more about a way of thinking. I have to make a choice. I have constraints. So how do I make that decision? What are the facts I weigh? But I mean, eventually we're going to have some math. How do you all approach that?
One thing that we haven't talked much about today is the K-8 space. And
Right.
K-8 is incredibly important. Some people say, how do you teach a kindergartner economics? Guess what? Economics, in some of these concepts, opportunity cost, cost benefit, some of these things are even easier, I think, to teach in the elementary grades. And I think we shouldn't understate how important it is to start early. And that's one of the places where infusion is a thing that would happen, where you would have lessons that go into the K-8 classroom. But, I think a lot of people think about it being very mathematical because of the experience they had in college where their professor was very mathematical. But the most of our work is not highly mathematical. We're not doing a lot of math. It's really the basics. For my principles of micro course that I teach when I teach college, the students only need a basic calculator. They don't need anything beyond that. And we do some graphing. It's good if a student has a good understanding of how graphs work. And some people never can really see that very well. And we work a little extra with those students.
That's great. I'm going to do speed answers from here on out because we have so many great questions. So, all of us work with any student who wants to learn economics, personal finance. We want to educate everybody, but we also know that if we can get people in underserved communities, lower, moderate income communities, that we can help decrease some of the disparities in our economy more broadly. So that is a focus for CE. I think it's a focus for all of us. One question that was quite specific, do we have any lesson segments on car loans, payday loans? How do you keep a credit score high? Things that are suitable for people who maybe aren't on a college track. And I'm pretty certain if you go to the Econ Ed link, which is where we have all of our curriculum, there are hundreds and hundreds of lessons, and I would be pretty confident we have something on most, if not all of those topics. I mean, even last year we did the economics of the Olympics. A lot of young people were watching Olympics on TV or on whatever social media. We had things about the economics of Lionel Messi. How does a star football, soccer player affect his home country, his region, the global economy? So there's a huge variety of lessons on things that are more everyday important and things that are just going to be cool for a young person to keep them interested. I don't know if you guys would add anything on that.
Huge number of resources also on federalreserveeducation.org, which is our portal site for all of the reserve banks. We have lots and lots of lessons and many topics just like you're talking about. All of those types of personal finance topics. There's so much available that's free, that's out there that teachers and students can access very easily, both through Econ Ed link, federalreserveeducation.org.
What about, we talked about young kids, and I know CE does something called Family Fun Nights, where we actually bring the parents or the caregivers in as well, and we have pizza, and it's learning, but also games. And sometimes we're actually teaching the parents too, which is
Yeah.
awesome. But what about middle school? We haven't really mentioned that age group yet. Anything specific about them you guys want to hit on?
The national challenges have a middle school division that are available to them. So that's one thing. Most national state standards have a strand in middle school where economics and or personal finance is required to be taught. So those too are exposed to economic and personal finance, as they should be.
And
we've done
our lesson plans also include stuff that's
Yeah.
appropriate for that age group. Sorry,
Absolutely.
Andrew, I interrupted you.
No, absolutely. You just hit exactly what I was going to say. Absolutely. CE has a number of lessons. We've done a number of programs over the years. You know, there's been a middle school world geography, which is geography and economics together. CE has a great financial fitness for life curriculum that has lessons at K2, K3, 5, 6, 8, and then the high school. And we've done a great middle school personal finance program for many years using the FFL, Financial Fitness for Life middle school curriculum.
One thing I want to hit in case we start losing people, there have been several people who've asked for links to some of the research, links to some of these resources. I'm going to make sure that I work with my colleagues at CE and we can put together something, and hopefully we have people's information who registered for today, and that'll be a great way for us to follow up and send some links to you all. So you don't just hear it from us, you can then follow up on your own and hopefully take advantage of a lot of what we're talking about. Let's see. Okay, we have a teacher asking, if I'm teaching personal finance and economics as a full year course, bravo that you get to do that. Which one would you do first? I think we'd agree economics, but anyone say it differently here?
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
I would say economics. I would say economics so that you have that foundational framework of decision making, trade-offs, scarcity exists, you have to make choices, all of those things.
Okay.
I don't know that there's a wrong way per se, so long as when you're teaching the personal finance aspect, you're delving into that econ unit.
Some people have done it where they do a little bit of each as they go. That's been done by some teachers we know in Delaware, where they do a little personal finance, they do a little economics, and those things they try to link up the topics that are adjacent or connected or overlap.
Great. We got one question. I love this. Is there any way economics teachers in developing countries like Nigeria can benefit from CE and efforts from the Fed and in Nebraska? And my answer is yes, absolutely. And again, we will follow up with lots and lots of links and make sure you guys have easy access to all of our websites and information. And it's free, and we absolutely want to make sure everyone and anyone can benefit from the CE. In recent years has been working overseas as well. Our focus is the United States and students in the United States, but we've done work in Asia as well. And we actually now have a global challenge that's starting to come together, which I think is very cool. Jennifer, can you, we're going to come back to that, just a specific, can you share the citation for undergraduate preparation of social studies teachers? If you have it in front of you, great. Otherwise, we can do it as a follow-up.
It is teachers' undergraduate coursework in economics in the baccalaureate and beyond longitudinal study. That's a lot of words, but I will send the link so that you can send it out.
Okay, great. Resources for parents and students who are in underserved communities. Andrew, I know CE has materials, but I am sure the Fed does as well. Do you want to touch on that?
It's a lot of great video products, as well as other Q&A, question and answer type products that, and I use products, things, items, activities, resources. There's no charge for them, but they're all available through federalreserveeducation.org. So there's just such a wealth of materials that are there. Lots of videos in particular that are useful with students. But then, even with young children, using children's books, some of my colleagues at the St. Louis Fed have worked with producing some parents' guides that go with various children's literature books that help to teach economics and personal finance concepts. So those are there, and you can link to them from federalreserveeducation.org.
That's great. This is a good question from a teacher. How do we get political and school level administrative support to include economic education, especially if we have new administrations which are trying to cut costs. And I think we all face that. How do we get more support?
That's such a great question. I think if you have a state council in your state, reach out to them, start there. CEE if you don't have one, but we're really trying hard to have this national push together, and we're stronger together to ensure economics doesn't get pushed out, and we'll help you make the case.
Yeah.
That's great. I like this one too. What can we do as economic educators to advocate for the inclusion of economics given the current environment of personal finance kind of pushing things? And I get it, right? People are in the chat are saying, well, personal finance is your daily life. And I think it's more tangible, right? If we're, how much do we need to put aside to afford our Starbucks? Or, you know, can I take this trip with my friends this year, or do I need to save more? That's personal finance. But again, economics, again, just to drill it home, that's the decision-making skill. That's the toolkit, to borrow your words, Jennifer, to understand how to make those trade-offs. So how would you push a school administrator or even, you know, local politicians to explain why economics? Let's just try it, come at it a different way. Let's give people help that they can use.
So personal finance is a subset of economics. Economics really is the model of what you were just saying, Rebecca, the trade-offs, the choices, the decision-making, to give students a framework of how to make good decisions. Personal finance comes underneath that. So they need that framework first in order to make good decisions with their personal finances.
And I think we can't underestimate the role the parents can play in this. So if you as a teacher are able to get your parents to understand what it is that you're doing and why it's important, and then have them act as advocates. I think this is one of the models that's been successful in other disciplines that have been successful in getting more time in the classroom for coverage of those topics, whether they be STEM or music or whatever the case may be.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up. Some people want to overlook how systemic factors impact a lot of individuals' personal finance experience. Okay, and personal finance education doesn't necessarily give a direct lever of action to address some of those factors. How can we convey that more effectively? I think I understand the question. So you have your day-to-day experience, and then you have the world around you that's impacting what your toolkit is, what you're working with to make those personal finance decisions. So how can we help people understand those systemic factors and work within it, I guess, is the question. It's a good question.
It is.
Anyone?
It's a good question, and it's really hard. And it really comes down to teachers being exposed to systemic issues, so teacher education, and then empathy, really this lifelong learning of what don't I know, and educators always asking themselves those questions. It would be good if there were some specific resources for us to help with that. I'm just not sure they exist. I know of one program, I want to say it's Delaware, Rhode Island. I'll have to find it. That is specific for this exact question that's being asked.
You know what we can do is, oh, I'm going to let you answer, Andrew, but either way, when we do a follow-up, we can try to find that. If it's Rhode Island, Delaware, if we can make a note and see if we can include that. Sorry, Andrew.
I think back to the kids that are in that Federal Reserve Education Fellows project that we were talking about, where we trained the teachers and then the teachers worked with the kids. And those were students who came from schools that and environments that there was a lot of turmoil. There were a huge number of distractions. Their circumstance was such that they might not be usually exposed to economics. And the role of the teacher there was pivotal. So we gave their teacher tools that they could use, and then they adapted and worked those materials because they're experts in working with their kids in their schools. And that was very highly successful. And it goes back to that pivotal role of the teacher in taking the material to their students. And they're so good at that in working with the kids that are in their individual schools. So they can be a huge, not just a multiplier, but also, you know, maybe an interpreter or they do the types of differentiated instruction that then reaches their kids successfully. So I think about those kids a lot. Those kids by the end of that program were really turned on to economics and excited about it. So.
And I would say from CE's perspective, again, we do a lot with students in underserved areas that have systemic constraints, if you will. And one of the programs that I'm most proud of is Invest in Girls, which is a program we have just for girls, teaching them economics, personal finance, but also showing them this is high school, showing them possibilities for their careers in economics, in the financial field. When I was growing up, I thought finance was going to the bank, ATM, and you put the little suction tube up and you got a lollipop and some cash. I didn't know, right? And I got very lucky that I got exposed to it later and then ended up having a career in it, which has just given me a ton of joy, personal satisfaction. But IIG, Invest in Girls, works with high school girls to show them what their choices are in high school, so they don't cut off a possibility before they even start college. And what we found is a lot of the girls we're working with are from those underserved communities, and it's affecting their lives and it's affecting their families' lives in really amazing, positive ways. I hear you. I also think it would be good to dig around Econ EdLink. Again, that's where all the curriculum is, and see if there are any things that jump out to you there that could be useful for those communities. We could keep going all night, but again, I do want to respect my colleagues' time here tonight and also all of you who took time out of your days to join us. We're so grateful that you did, and we appreciate your interest. We are going to follow up, and we hope you will too. Look at the Federal Reserve's materials, Nebraska's materials, CE's materials. We're all doing everything we can to help teachers, to make it easier for them to be really successful in the classroom. And we all have the same goal. We just want to make sure every student in the United States has an economics and personal finance education to help themselves, their families, and ultimately our economy. Thank you all so much. Jennifer, Andrew, thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yes, absolutely.